Daniel Lee Siebert worked as an art teacher for the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind in 1986. There, he unleashed pure terror, taking the lives of hearing-impaired student Sherry Weathers, her sons Chad, 5, and Joey, 4, fellow student Linda Jarman, and waitress Linda Odom, whom he had an intimate relationship with. All of these victims were asphyxiated, seemingly Siebert's preferred MO. When the authorities caught up to Siebert, he confessed to his Alabama activities and up to 12 additional ones nationwide. He developed pancreatic cancer while on death row and passed away in 2008 before his execution date arrived. Robert Hansen, a quiet Anchorage baker, led a double life in the 1970s and 80s. He took women against their will, often ladies of the night, and flew them in his private plane into the Alaskan wilderness. There, with his rifle, he hunted them like animals. Hansen eventually admitted to 17 of these fatal acts and was suspected in more than 30. Authorities recovered victims in remote areas mapped from Hansen's own aviation logbook. Investigators later discovered a hidden cache of weapons, jewelry, and victim IDs in his home, proving he had operated with chilling precision for more than a decade. Mark Godot terrorized Phoenix between 2005 and 2006. He attacked people in everyday settings, walking home from bus stops, crossing parking lots, and standing on sidewalks. And in several cases, he would just shoot victims at close range. While some of his victims were just hurt or robbed, 9 people lost their lives. The randomness left residents feeling unsafe anywhere in the city. Investigators finally broke the case in 2006 when a DNA match from a forensic sample identified Godot and ended his horrific activities. Ronald Gene Simmons shocked Arkansas in December 1987 with the deadliest single-offender case in state history. Over 1 week, he shot 14 of his own family members at his Dover home, hiding many of their bodies around the property. Days later, he drove to nearby Russellville businesses and opened fire again, leaving 2 more people to meet an untimely end, and several wounded before surrendering. Investigators recovered the bodies at his house, turning the case into a grim benchmark for Arkansas law enforcement. In the summer of 1985, Los Angeles residents nailed their windows shut and slept with the lights on, gripped by fear of a man the press dubbed the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez entered homes at random, brutally taking the lives of 13 people and attacking many others across the city. He used a variety of methods, and his victims ranged from children to the elderly, making no one feel safe and making him hard to catch. Investigators finally linked him through shoe prints and fingerprints, and he was captured after residents recognized him on the streets and subdued him. January 1975. Karen Campbell vanished from a Snowmass hotel hallway. Weeks later, her body was found near Aspen. That spring, Julie Cunningham disappeared while walking to meet a friend in Vail, and Denise Oliverson vanished while bicycling in Grand Junction. Ted Bundy lured away, attacked with blunt force, and took his victims' lives through asphyxiation, leaving their bodies in remote areas. He confessed to multiple such activities in Colorado and was charged in the Campbell case. While awaiting trial, Bundy jumped from a courthouse window in Aspen to escape. He was then recaptured. Then, months later, escaped the Garfield County Jail and fled the state. Colorado investigators tied him to multiple young women's deaths in the region, but he was gone before trial. When 17-year-old Tammy Williams disappeared while walking home from her boyfriend's house in 1982, police didn't yet know they were dealing with a serial killer. Michael Ross stalked rural roads in eastern Connecticut, offering rides to young women before wrapping his hands around their neck until life left their bodies. By 1984, he had done so to 8 young women and girls across Connecticut and New York, 6 of them in his home state. His arrest finally solved a string of unsolved disappearances, and in 2005, he was executed, the first in New England in decades. Delaware's only confirmed serial killer was caught through microscopic evidence. In 1987 and 88, women vanished near U.S. Route 40, their bodies later found along desolate stretches. Forensic tests revealed blue carpet fibers and adhesive tape on the victims, materials traced directly to Stephen Pinnell's van. He had picked up the women, restrained them inside the vehicle, and discarded their bodies along the highway. Convicted on multiple counts, Pinnell was executed in 1992. Here's Ted Bundy again, with his final string of crimes that took place in Florida after his 1977 escape from Colorado. In January 1978, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University and attacked 4 women, 2 of whom did not survive. Weeks later, 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared from her school in Lake City. Bundy was later convicted in her case. Florida courts imposed 3 death sentences, and Bundy was executed at Rayford Prison in 1989. Carlton Gary attacked elderly women in Columbus, Georgia, between 1977 and 78. He gained entry to homes at night and used ligatures, often stockings, to end the lives of his victims. The community lived under heightened alerts and fear until his arrest years later, when DNA and fingerprint evidence tied him to the crimes. Gary was convicted of 3 capital cases, though authorities suspected more. Georgia executed him in 2018, 4 decades after the original series of crimes. The Honolulu Strangler, Hawaii's first known serial killer, targeted women in 1985 and 86. Victims were found near highways and airport access roads, and each had been bound and left in isolated spots. Police formed a special task force and set up roadblocks, questioning drivers in the area, but the offender was never caught. 5 women in total lost their lives. Despite intense investigation, the Honolulu Strangler remains unidentified, leaving Hawaii with an unsolved serial case. Joseph Edward Duncan III drew national attention in 2005 after targeting the Grony family near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. He entered their home, ended the lives of 3 family members, and forcibly took away 2 children. One child, Shasta Grony, was recognized from missing child reports when Duncan took her to a Denny's restaurant. Staff stalled Duncan and called the police. Once arrested, he confessed to additional crimes, including taking the life of a young boy in California. Investigators also linked him to multiple child cases across states. John Wayne Gacy lured teenage boys and young men to his home in Cook County, Illinois during the 1970s. He attacked them, taking many of their lives, and buried the majority of them in the crawl space beneath his house. In total, authorities recovered 29 bodies from his property and linked him to 33 fatalities overall. After his arrest, investigators found his detailed hand-drawn map of burial locations in the crawl space, which matched the exact placement of bodies during excavation. He was convicted on 33 counts in 1980 and executed by lethal injection in 1994. The Fox Hollow Farm Estate outside Indianapolis, Indiana, became a crime scene in the mid-1990s after investigators uncovered thousands of bone fragments scattered across the property. Herb Baumeister, a successful businessman, was accused of luring young men to his home, where he ended their lives by asphyxiation. He fled to Canada and ended his own life in 1996 before trial. Forensics teams ultimately recovered more than 5,000 bone and tooth fragments, a scale of evidence that suggested far more victims than the 11 definitively linked to him. Iowa has been spared the kind of confirmed serial cases seen in many other states, but there is one figure, Donald Piper, who is extremely disturbing. In September 1993, 36-year-old Shirley Dowd was found in her West Des Moines hotel room after being attacked and having her airflow cut off until she perished. Nearly a decade later, DNA testing linked the crime to Piper, a hotel maintenance worker with master key access to guest rooms. Convicted in 2002 and sentenced to life, police later re-examined other suspicious fatalities and violence in Iowa hotels from the same period. noting similar patterns of women being targeted while staying alone, raising the possibility that Piper was responsible for far more than just one case. For more than 30 years, Wichita, Kansas residents lived in fear of the self-named BTK, each letter standing for what he did to his victims. Dennis Rader taunted authorities and the press with letters describing how he selected and stalked families. Between 1974 and 1991, he took the lives of 10 people, including children, leaving behind staged scenes that showed meticulous planning. His capture in 2005 came only after he began sending new communications to police, giving away digital evidence. Rader is now serving 10 consecutive life sentences. In 1960, investigators discovered the remains of the Jackson family and linked the case to Melvin Reese. Years later, in the late 1950s, Reese had begun his violent attacks across multiple states. His criminal activities were diverse and combined forced captivity, predatory attacks, and victims shot at close range, leaving investigators struggling to connect cases spread across multiple states. When police searched his belongings, they found disturbing drawings and written fantasies, evidence that prosecutors used to argue Reese had planned for far more violence than was confirmed in court. From 1997 to 2006, Ronald Dominique preyed on men in rural Louisiana, luring them from bars or the street and wringing the life from them at the neck. He confessed to ending the lives of 23 men, many of them homeless or vulnerable. He left their bodies in sugarcane fields or along back roads. Despite the growing number of cases, he stayed off law enforcement's radar for nearly a decade. That said, records show Dominique had multiple prior arrests, mostly for minor charges, which allowed him to avoid deeper scrutiny until his eventual confession. In September 2006, police in Newry, Maine uncovered 4 bodies linked to Christian Nielsen, a local chef. He had taken the life of a guest at the inn, and later added 3 more victims: the inn owner, her daughter, and the daughter's friend. Nielsen dismembered and burned the remains at a rented cabin, crimes that stunned the small New England community. Court testimony revealed he calmly described his heinous actions to investigators, showing little emotion, which only heightened the shock for a state with almost no history of serial crimes. Joe Roy Methane's crimes in Baltimore during the 1990s combined brutality with chilling confessions. He admitted to luring women working the streets and addicts to isolated spots, where he took their lives and dismembered them. In interviews, Metheny claimed he sometimes mixed human flesh into food and sold it at a roadside stand, though this detail was never proven in court. He was convicted of just 2 cases, but admitted to several more. Police later connected him to several disappearances near his South Baltimore hangouts, which showed how long he had operated before capture. Between 1962 and 64, the bodies of 13 women were found in their Boston apartments. Many had had their own clothing used to cut off their breathing. Panic spread through the city as women installed new locks and avoided being alone at night. Albert DeSalvo confessed, and police files showed he had impersonated repairmen to enter apartments, explaining how he gained access to victims. In 2013, DNA evidence tied him to the Mary Sullivan case, though there were doubts about whether he actually acted alone. In the late 1960s, the bodies of female students in Michigan were found in remote areas and showed signs they had been violated and attacked with a knife. The person responsible was John Norman Collins, a college student who blended into the same social world as his victims. He often borrowed cars from friends to commit crimes, making him harder to track during the spree. Investigators eventually caught up to him and convicted him of 1 homicide and suspected him in 6 more. Between 1980 and 82, Paul Michael Stefani attacked women in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area with blunt objects or knives. After several such attacks, he himself called 911 using a trembling, emotional voice, admitting what he had done and begging police to stop him. 3 women lost their lives, but others survived his attacks. The recordings of his weeping confessions became infamous, capturing the sound of his guilt and fear. The chilling audio clips are still used in criminal profiling courses today. Samuel Little, later confirmed by the FBI as the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, admitted to being directly responsible for taking over 90 lives nationwide. Little targeted vulnerable women, often street workers, and used suffocation as his method. Though many crimes went unproven at the time, decades later, investigators matched his sketches to missing persons reports from Pascagoula and the Gulf Coast region, proving his direct ties to Mississippi cases. Robert Berdella operated in Kansas City, Missouri during the 1980s, luring young men to his home where he sedated, restrained, and inflicted terrible harm on them. He kept detailed notes and photographs of his crimes, which came to light after a victim escaped in 1988. Police uncovered evidence linking him to at least 6 such cases, along with the grisly records of his methods. Additional evidence showed he purchased chemicals and devices by mail to carry out his crimes. These discoveries painted Berdella as unusually methodical, turning his home into a carefully staged trap. In the 1980s, a string of unsolved deaths in Missoula, Montana, baffled police. That is until Wayne Nance himself lost his life during a failed home invasion in 1986. Nance had worked as a furniture mover, giving him access to people's homes. After his passing, investigators linked him through evidence to multiple earlier cases, including the shooting of a co-worker's mother. Items seized from his residence connected him to at least 5 victims. In Omaha, Nebraska during the early 1980s, 2 boys, ages 12 and 13, disappeared while walking to school. Their bodies were later found with multiple knife wounds, and investigators noted distinctive bite marks. The crimes terrified local families, who feared their children could be next. John Jobert, a 20-year-old Air Force airman, was identified through dental records and confessed to 3 homicides. Police also found drawings and journals in his quarters describing violent fantasies that predated his crimes. Carol Cole confessed to fatally attacking at least 13 women across several states, but Nevada is where he received the death penalty. Cole forcibly stopped the breathing of women he met in bars and boarding houses, claiming he was punishing them for what he saw as immoral behavior. Cole's violent tendencies had been documented since childhood, including early psychological evaluations warning he might become dangerous. Arrested in Las Vegas in 1980, he confessed to a string of crimes, and in 1985, the state of Nevada imposed the ultimate punishment on him, a fate he had long claimed to inflict on others. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Terry Rasmussen lived in New Hampshire under the alias Robert Evans. In 1985, hunters near Allenstown discovered a barrel containing the remains of an adult woman and a young girl. Another barrel with 2 more children was found in 2000. DNA evidence later confirmed Rasmussen was responsible. Known for assuming new identities and moving frequently, his Bear Brook violent crimes became New Hampshire's most infamous case, remaining unsolved for decades until modern genealogy cracked it. Charles Cullen, a nurse who worked in hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania, confessed to intentionally and directly ending the lives of as many as 40 patients by injecting lethal doses of medication. His victims were often hospital patients who trusted staff to care for them. Cullen's crimes, uncovered in the early 2000s, exploited his medical position and shook public trust in hospital safety. Investigators later concluded that suspicious patient fatalities stretched back 16 years across at least 9 different medical facilities. Investigators in 1999 uncovered David Parker Ray's soundproof trailer in New Mexico, later called the Toy Box. Inside were restraints, surgical tools, and recorded instructions for his captives. Ray admitted to luring women there for years, although no bodies were ever found. Prosecutors convicted him on several violent charges, and authorities estimate he may have had dozens of victims, though only 3 women survived and testified against him. New York City in 1976 and 77 lived in fear of a gunman who targeted couples in parked cars. David Berkowitz was responsible for taking the lives of 6 people and wounding 7 others. He taunted police and the press with letters in which he called himself the Son of Sam. The randomness of his attacks spread across the city and led to widespread panic. Berkowitz was eventually caught after a parking ticket placed him at a crime scene, ending the year-long spree. In the early 1990s, Charlotte, North Carolina was shaken by a series of fatal attacks that seemed at first unconnected. Henry Louis Wallace, a local restaurant worker, had befriended many of his victims, women he knew personally through work or social ties. Between 1992 and 94, he ended the lives of at least 9 women, often in their own apartments. Police faced criticism for failing to connect the cases sooner. At trial, Wallace confessed in detail to 9 of the fatalities. At the turn of the 20th century, neighbors in Niagara, North Dakota, suspected eccentric farmer Eugene Butler of strange behavior. But no one imagined the extent of his crimes. After his passing in 1913, 6 skeletons were found buried in his basement, all showing signs of blunt force trauma. The discovery stunned the small farming town, which had no idea they had lived alongside a maniac. Butler is still North Dakota's most terrifying historical case of a real-life hidden monster. In 2009, Cleveland police entered Anthony Sowell's home searching for a missing woman, but what they found was decomposing bodies. Sowell had lured women to his house with promises of alcohol or illicit substances, then restricted their breathing with his bare hands until life left their bodies. 11 victims were discovered, most hidden within the home. For years, complaints about foul odors had been dismissed, leaving the crime undetected. Sowell was convicted of his crimes in 2011 and placed on death row. Roger Dale Stafford is remembered for the 1978 Sirloin Stockade case in Oklahoma City, where 6 restaurant employees were shot at close range during a robbery. But what made Stafford a serial offender was a separate crime months earlier, when he and his accomplices attacked a family of 3 on a highway, leaving all of them lifeless. Convicted of 9 fatal attacks in total, Stafford was executed in 1995 after years of appeals, making him Oklahoma's most infamous serial offender. Known as the Molalla Forest Killer, Dayton Leroy Rogers targeted women in the mid-1980s. He picked up street workers in Portland, Oregon, where he drove them to wooded areas where he inflicted brutal harm before taking their lives. At least 7 women were found in the Molalla Forest, though investigators suspect there were even more victims. Rogers was convicted in 1988 and received multiple capital sentences. His reputation as a predator who used Oregon's wilderness as cover made him especially feared. In 1987, police discovered that Gary Heidnik had held 6 women captive in the basement of his Philadelphia home. He was attempting to build what he described as a community of captives to bear his children. He subjected the women to prolonged harm, and 2 did not survive. One victim's escape in March 1987 led police to raid his house, where they discovered the others alive, but in appalling conditions. What shocked the city most was the setting, a densely populated neighborhood where no one suspected what was happening inside. Heidnik was convicted of multiple counts and sentenced to death. In the late 1980s, Warwick, Rhode Island was stunned when teenager Greg Price confessed to ending the lives of 4 neighbors, including 2 children. Price was a child when he committed his first homicidal act at just 13, and by 15, he repeated the crime multiple times. His age meant juvenile law could only hold him until 21, sparking public outcry. Lawmakers later passed legislation allowing juveniles charged with serious violent crimes to be tried as adults, a direct change driven by Price's case. Donald Gaskins, nicknamed Pee-wee, claimed responsibility for dozens of fatalities across the South, though authorities confirmed at least 9 in South Carolina during the 1970s. Gaskins took lives for personal reasons, and also for hire, often disposing of bodies in rural areas he called his private cemetery. But even prison didn't stop him. While on death row in 1982, he committed one more final act of terror. By rigging an electronic device with explosives, he took out fellow inmate Rudolph Tyner, detonating it when Tyner used it. In the 1990s, Sioux Falls police linked Robert Leroy Anderson to the disappearances of 2 women. Investigators discovered he had built a soundproof chamber and used it to imprison his victims before ending their lives. Investigators also tied Anderson to an attempt on another woman's life in 1996, but she managed to escape and gave authorities key details about his methods of using handcuffs and fake work uniforms. What's even more creepy is that Anderson didn't act alone. His acquaintance, Jamie Hammer, was later convicted for aiding Anderson in one of the attacks. In 1997, Nashville area residents were stunned by a string of fast food restaurant robberies that ended with 7 employees no longer living. Paul Dennis Reed, a former country music hopeful, carried out the crimes across multiple locations like McDonald's, Captain D's, and Baskin-Robbins over just a few months. Reed had mapped out additional restaurants as future targets, showing he intended to keep attacking. But he was caught after a tip from a failed robbery that unraveled everything. Between 1970 and 73, Dean Corll, aided by 2 teenage accomplices, lured young boys in Houston with candy or small favors, earning him the nickname Candyman. At least 28 victims were taken and had their lives ended by Candyman. The crimes came to light only after one accomplice shot Corll and confessed to police, leading to the recovery of bodies buried in rented boathouses and fields. It is the largest recovery of youth victims from a single offender in U.S. history. In the early 1980s, Utah families were devastated when 5 young boys disappeared over the span of 4 years. Investigators later connected the case to Arthur Gary Bishop, a former Mormon missionary who confessed after his arrest in 1983. Bishop admitted to luring boys with promises of toys or activities, then committing unmentionable acts to them. His focus on children, combined with the long stretch before capture, made him Utah's most terrifying offender. He was executed in 1988. When Israel Keyes was arrested in Alaska in 2012, he confessed to capital crimes in multiple states, including Vermont. In 2011, he broke into the Essex Junction home of Bill and Lorraine Currier, forced them out, and later admitted to ending their lives and disposing of their remains, which were never found. He told investigators he had buried kill kits, which contained weapons and body disposal tools, in advance across several states, including Vermont, demonstrating the planning that made him so difficult to track. In the late 1980s, residents in Richmond, Virginia, lived in fear as women were attacked in their own homes, their breathing cut off with ligatures. The crimes were traced to Timothy Spencer, who often scouted neighborhoods in advance of his activities, breaking in when women were alone. But he left something behind. Timothy Spence became the first American convicted using DNA evidence. That forensic match tied him to 4 bodies in Virginia. His execution in 1994 marked the end of Virginia's first DNA-driven case. For 2 decades, women went missing in the Seattle area, many last seen near highways. Police eventually linked the cases to Gary Ridgway, who admitted to ending the lives of dozens of women and leaving them in wooded areas or near the Green River. He deliberately targeted women he thought police would overlook, a tactic that allowed him to evade capture for years before his 2001 arrest. He was convicted of 49 fatalities, though investigators believe the number is higher. In 1931, police in Clarksburg, West Virginia, uncovered a garage filled with evidence linking Harry Powers to multiple victims. Powers had posed as a Lonely Hearts suitor, luring women and their children to West Virginia with promises of marriage before taking their lives. Newspapers at the time called him the Bluebeard of Quiet Dell. He had planned to move the scheme to other towns, but his arrest in 1931 and execution in 1932 put a stop to that. His crimes shocked the nation and is still West Virginia's most infamous case of serial predation. In 1991, Milwaukee police entered Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment and discovered a crime scene that stunned the world. Dahmer had brutally ended the lives of 17 young men and boys between 1978 and 1991, dismembering many and keeping body parts as trophies. He lured victims from bars or bus stops, offering money or companionship before attacking them in his apartment. Dahmer's crimes exposed systemic police failures to follow up on prior reports and left a permanent scar on Wisconsin's history. Dahmer's crimes also didn't win him any friends in prison. He met his fate at the hands of another inmate there in 1994. In 1988, 18-year-old Lisa Marie Kimmel disappeared while driving across Wyoming in her car with the Little Miss license plate. Her body was found a week later in the North Platte River. For years, the case went unsolved until a 2002 DNA match identified Dale Wayne Eaton, a drifter with a violent past. Investigators later tied him to other disappearances across the region, dubbing him the suspected Great Basin Killer. Eaton was sentenced to death in Wyoming in 2004, making his case the state's most notorious example of serial predation. Let us know if there's another topic you want us to cover in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so we can keep these videos coming. Thanks again. See you next time.